you can shoot one of these tractors to start it. Not a joke, an actual cartridge screwed into the cylinder head. Another one runs a Detroit diesel and screams like a chainsaw the size of a car. One has no radiator at all. Every company that built these machines is dead. Bought out, broken up, erased. The logos survive only on rusted fuel tanks. But the tractors, still starting, still pulling, still out there, refusing to quit. Number 1. The Cockshutt 570 Super. Start in Brantford, Ontario, with a company most of the world has completely forgotten. Cockshutt was a Canadian firm, and in a market dominated by American giants, it did something the giants hadn't done. In 1946, it launched the Cockshutt 30, the first mass-produced tractor in North America with a truly independent live power takeoff. That means the PTO kept spinning even when you pushed the clutch in. Today, that sounds trivial. In 1946, it was the difference between a baler that kept chewing through a heavy windrow and a baler that plugged solid every time you slowed down. Farmers noticed. Cockshutt had genuinely leapfrogged the big boys. The tractor that carried that engineering DNA into the late 50s was the 500 series, and the toughest of the bunch was the 570 Super. Under that long hood sat a 6-cylinder Hercules engine, a bought-in industrial motor, not a farm tractor engine designed down to a price. Hercules built engines for trucks, generators, military equipment. They were engineered to run all day at load and not complain, and that's exactly what the 570 did. A big 6 turning modest revs with lots of displacement, doing the work instead of high engine speed, is a recipe for an engine that simply doesn't wear out. And then Cockshutt was gone. White Motor Corporation absorbed the company in the early 1960s, the same corporate Hoover that swallowed Oliver and Minneapolis-Moline, and the Cockshutt name faded from the fields. But go to a farm auction in Ontario or Saskatchewan today, and you will still see 570s. Not restored show ponies, working tractors, running loaders, hauling wagons. The brand died 60 years ago. The tractors didn't get the memo. Number 2. The Oliver 1900. If you have never heard an Oliver 1900 startup, you have never heard a farm tractor scream. Oliver had a problem in 1960. They needed serious horsepower fast, and they didn't have a big diesel of their own ready to go. So they went shopping, and they came back with something nobody expected. They bolted a General Motors Detroit diesel into a farm tractor, specifically the GM 453, a 4-cylinder, 2-stroke diesel from Detroit's famous 53 series family. 2-stroke diesels are a different animal entirely. Every cylinder fires on every revolution. They're blown by a supercharger just to breathe, and they make a hard, metallic, ripping noise that sounds less like a tractor and more like a chainsaw the size of a car. Detroit 2-strokes powered buses, trucks, boats, and generators all over the world. They were legendary for one thing above all: they would run and run and run. The Oliver 1900 was the result, a big row-crop tractor with a Detroit diesel heart, comfortably up in the high 80s horsepower at the PTO, at a time when a lot of farmers were still working with 50. It was loud, it smoked on startup, fuel economy was not its love language, and farmers who bought one either hated it or worshipped it, with almost nobody in between. Oliver later moved on to other engine sources. The 1900 was replaced, and Oliver itself was absorbed into white. The screaming Detroit-powered Oliver became a footnote, except it didn't. Because Detroit diesels are one of the most rebuildable engine families ever produced. Parts are still available. Marine mechanics still know them inside out. And that is why, decades after Oliver ceased to exist as a brand, there are still 1900s out there tearing across fields, sounding like the end of the world, being kept alive by parts intended for boats and buses. Number 3. The Allis-Chalmers D-17, Persian orange. That color meant something in the American Midwest. The D-17 arrived in 1957 and stayed in production for a decade, which, for a single tractor model in that ferociously competitive era, tells you everything. Allis-Chalmers didn't keep building it because they were lazy. They kept building it because farmers kept buying it. The star of the show was the power director. Allis gave the D-17 a hand-operated lever that let you shift between a high and a low range on the move, under load, without stopping and without touching the foot clutch. 4 gears in each range, so 8 forward speeds, and crucially, the ability to drop into the low range mid-furrow when the plow hit heavy clay without losing momentum and without stalling. Ask anyone who plowed with one. That single lever is the reason they remember the tractor with affection. The engines were straightforward. Over square, torquey units in the region of 60 horsepower at the belt, gas, LPG, or diesel depending on what you ordered. And the whole tractor was built with the kind of casting thickness that modern engineers would call wasteful and old mechanics call insurance. Allis-Chalmers itself did not survive the 1980s farm crisis. The agricultural division was sold off in 1985 and eventually became part of what we now know as AGSO. The company that built the D-17 does not exist anymore. The D-17 does. Thousands of them. It is one of the most common vintage tractors still in genuine daily use on small American farms because it's simple enough for a farmer to fix, strong enough to do real work, and there are still enough parts in circulation to keep them alive indefinitely. Number 4. The Minneapolis-Moline G1000. Prairie Gold, the yellow tractor from a company that no longer exists. Minneapolis-Moline was always slightly out of step with the rest of the industry, and that's exactly why the machines were so tough. While everyone else was chasing higher revs to squeeze more horsepower out of smaller engines, went the other way. Big bore, long stroke, enormous displacement, low engine speed. Their philosophy was simple: let the cubic inches do the work and let the engine loaf. The G1000, which arrived in the mid-60s, was that philosophy fully expressed. A huge 6-cylinder engine, lugging along at speeds that would have a modern high-revving diesel yawning, hauling a plow through ground that would have stopped a lesser tractor. And these engines were genuinely enormous for a farm tractor of the era. The kind of displacement you'd expect in a truck. Here's the engineering point most people miss. An engine that makes its power at low RPM is an engine that lives longer. Piston speed is what kills engines. Fewer revolutions per hour means fewer combustion cycles, less bearing fatigue, less bore wear. Minneapolis-Moline's stubborn old-fashioned approach accidentally produced some of the longest-lived engines in American agriculture. Was also one of the great champions of LPG, propane-fueled tractors, which run astonishingly clean, barely contaminate the oil, and can rack up thousands of hours with minimal internal wear. Minneapolis-Moline was pulled into white in the 1960s, and the brand was allowed to fade away. But the G1000 and its big Prairie Gold siblings are still out there, still working on grain farms, still being restored by people who understand what they've got. Number 5. The Field Marshal Series 3 now crossed the Atlantic to Gainsborough, Lincolnshire, and to a tractor so stubborn it needed explosives to start. Marshall Sons and Company built the Field Marshal, and it was unlike anything else in the field. One cylinder, one enormous cylinder, roughly 6 liters of diesel, all by itself, thumping over at a leisurely few hundred revolutions per minute. The whole tractor beat like a heart. You could hear one working from the far side of a valley. But it's the starting procedure that made it a legend. To start a Field Marshal, the standard method was to insert a smoldering, slow-burning paper into a holder in the cylinder head, decompress the engine, and crank it by hand until the heat and compression caught. On a cold, damp English morning, that could take a while, a long while, so Marshall offered an alternative. A cartridge, an actual blank shotgun-style cartridge that you screwed into the head and struck, using the explosion to force the piston down and turn the engine over. Yes, you literally shot the tractor into life. It sounds absurd. It was also brilliantly effective, and it tells you something profound about the machine, an engine. That simple, with that few moving parts, running that slowly, has almost nothing in it to break. No electrics to fail, no injection pump complexity of the kind we'd see later. A single piston, a single injector, an enormous flywheel. Field Marshal production ended in the late 1950s. Marshall as a tractor manufacturer effectively disappeared. And yet, these single-cylinder monsters are one of the most sought-after vintage tractors in Britain today. Because when you find one in a hedge, half buried, seized, forgotten for 40 years, the odds are frighteningly good that you can get it running again. Number 6. The David Brown 990 Implematic, Meltham, West Yorkshire. a gear-cutting company that ended up building one of Britain's most beloved tractors. David Brown was, first and foremost, a precision engineering firm. Gears, transmissions, machine tools. That heritage matters because when a gear specialist builds a tractor gearbox, the gearbox does not fail. That is the single most underappreciated fact about David Brown tractors, and it is the main reason so many are still running. The 990 Implematic arrived in the early 60s with a 3-cylinder diesel in the mid-40s to 50s horsepower bracket. Modest on paper, enormous in reality, because David Brown engines were famously torquey and famously unburstable. Implematic referred to the hydraulic implement system, which gave the tractor proper draft control and made it a serious competitor to the Fergusons and Fordsons of the era. What made the 990 special wasn't a headline feature. It was the total absence of weak points. The engine was durable. The gearbox was, in the most literal sense, made by people who made gears for a living. The hydraulics were straightforward. The whole thing was over-engineered in an unglamorous, industrial Yorkshire kind of way. David Brown was bought by Case in the early 1970s. The tractors went red, and eventually the David Brown name disappeared from the fields entirely. But drive around rural Britain and Ireland today and you will still see 990s, not in museums but on livestock farms, running feeder wagons and yard scrapers, doing the unglamorous daily work that would have killed a lesser machine decades ago. They're often on their second or third engine rebuild and their first gearbox. That's the David Brown story in one sentence. Number 7. The Nuffield 1060. There is something delightfully strange about a tractor built by the same corporate family that produced the Mini. Nuffield was part of the British Motor Corporation empire, and Nuffield tractors were built with BMC engineering, including in the 1060, a big BMC diesel of around 3.8 liters producing roughly 60 horsepower. That engine is the whole story. It was a proper commercial vehicle diesel, iron block, big bearings, low stress, designed to run for tens of thousands of hours in vans and lorries and industrial plant. Drop an engine like that into a tractor that only ever asks it to work at a fraction of its potential, and you get something close to immortality. The 1060 was a big, comfortable, powerful machine for its day, competing directly against Fordson and Massey Ferguson at a time when British agriculture was mechanizing at extraordinary speed. Nuffield's naming convention told you the story. 10-speed gearbox, 60 horsepower. Then the corporate machinery turned. Nuffield became Leyland. The orange tractors became blue, and Leyland's agricultural division eventually collapsed. The Nuffield name, one of the great names of British engineering, vanished from tractors entirely. And yet the tractors themselves became cult objects. Vintage enthusiasts in Britain, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand keep them running in serious numbers. They're prized in tractor-pulling circles. And on small farms, they still turn up doing real work, because there is very little in a Nuffield that can catastrophically fail, and almost nothing on it that a competent person with basic tools cannot fix in a farmyard. Number 8. The Deutz D-Series Air-Cooled Diesel. Now for the German entry, and the one built on a genuinely radical idea. Deutz, from Cologne, is one of the oldest engine manufacturers on Earth. The company traces its lineage back to Nikolaus Otto, the man who gave us the 4-stroke Otto cycle. And Deutz made a decision that set their tractors apart from almost everything else on the market. They did not water-cool their engines. No radiator, no water pump, no hoses, no thermostat, no head gasket in the conventional sense, because each cylinder was an individual, finned barrel with its own head, cooled by air blasted over it by a big engine-driven fan. Think about what that eliminates. Overheating from a burst hose? Impossible. Freezing and cracking a block in a hard winter because someone forgot the antifreeze? Impossible. A blown head gasket taking out the whole engine? Structurally, there isn't one to blow in the way you're imagining. Corrosion in the water jackets, slowly eating the block from the inside over 30 years? There are no water jackets. The Deutz D-Series series, machines like the D-6006, became the definitive expression of this, and they went everywhere. Deutz Air-Cooled tractors ended up working in the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East, in South American dust, in Eastern European mud, in places where a cooling system was the single most likely thing to fail. And here is the ultimate proof. Individual cylinders mean individual repairs. A single scored bore doesn't mean a new engine. It means one barrel and one piston. Deutz Fahr still exists, but the classic air-cooled D-Series is long out of production. It is also one of the most durable tractor engine designs of the 20th century, and thousands are still working. Number 9. The Zetor Crystal 8011. Behind the Iron Curtain, engineering ran on a completely different set of rules, and it produced some of the toughest tractors ever built. Zetor, based in Brno, had been making tractors since 1946, and by the late 60s the company launched the Crystal series. The 8011 was a 4-cylinder diesel of around 80 horsepower, and it was designed under a constraint that Western manufacturers simply didn't face. It had to be repairable by a State Farm mechanic in a shed with limited parts in a country where you could not simply order a replacement tractor. That constraint is a superpower. It forces simplicity. It forces standardization. Zetor built its engines as a modular family, so components carried across models, which meant parts were everywhere and knowledge was universal. Zetor also deserves genuine credit for safety. The company was an early and serious adopter of the protective safety cab, at a time when many Western tractors still put the driver on an open seat with a rollover as a real possibility. That's not marketing, that's engineering with the operator's life in mind. And Zetors were built for export, in enormous numbers, to Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, which is precisely why they're still alive. A machine designed to be fixed in a place with no dealer network is a machine that can be fixed anywhere, forever. The Crystal series is long gone from production. But go to rural India, to Pakistan, to parts of Africa, to Eastern Europe, and you will still find Zetors of this vintage working. Often hard, often daily, often with a mixture of original, aftermarket, and homemade parts inside them. They do not stop. Number 10. The Belarus MTZ-80, and finally, the one that might just be the most unkillable tractor ever made. The Minsk Tractor Works. MTZ began building tractors after the Second World War, and its 50 series and then 80 series machines became a phenomenon on a scale that is genuinely difficult to comprehend. MTZ is one of the largest tractor manufacturers in the history of the world by sheer volume, and the 80 series family has been produced in colossal numbers, exported to dozens of countries, and built under license and in local variants far beyond Soviet borders. The MTZ-80 was a 4-cylinder diesel in the 80 horsepower class, and it was built on a philosophy of brutal, uncompromising simplicity. Heavy, basic, mechanical, nothing electronic, nothing delicate, nothing that requires a specialist. If a farmer in Central Asia or West Africa or the Caucasus needed it running by morning, it could be running by morning. Its Polish cousin, the Ursus C360, and the Ursus line that followed, came out of the same Eastern Bloc engineering tradition. Machines designed on the assumption that they would be abused, neglected, overloaded, run on questionable fuel, and expected to keep going anyway. And they did, and they do. The Belarus MTZ family is still working today in enormous numbers on every continent, including tractors built in the 70s and 80s that have never had anything resembling a proper service. The Soviet Union collapsed. The country that built it ceased to exist. The tractor is still going. Which one would you take home? Tell me in the comments, and if you drove one of these, tell us what it was really like. The people who actually ran these machines know things the history books never recorded.